Michigan Avenue was blocked off from 37th Street all the way to 39th Street. There were crowds of people on both sides of the street.
I was busier than, as they say, a one-eyed dog in a sausage factory. Mr. Roosevelt looked at me and smiled and says, "My, you're a busy young man." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I was so proud to photograph her.
The center was jammed with people. It was quite an affair. Socialites and there were plenty of policy kings, those that were acceptable.
J. Levert Kelly gave a lot of money, and he was a great supporter. His name was sort of risque, and we didn't want to put it together with Eleanor Roosevelt and the Art Center.
He was a bully and I think a dangerous man.
Someone had him picked up that day so that he would not be able to attend.
St. Louis Kelly was released that evening when Mrs. Roosevelt was on her way out of town.
Eleanor Roosevelt was certainly a cultural ambassador for FDR. So there was political gain to be gotten from Eleanor Roosevelt coming here. I think it was the importance of the Art Center and the black vote to the president then.
As the artists settled into their newly dedicated center, the nation soon settled into the reality of a country at war. The community that raised funds to purchase and transform a Southside mansion into a cultural institution would soon be shadowed by the struggle to keep the Southside Community Arts Center alive. With increased United States involvement in World War II, funding for the federal arts program would end in 1943. In this period of wartime, we have our own plans for defense, a defense of culture. We painted slums and ghettos, or sad, hollow-eyed black men, women, and children. They were the people around us. We were part of them. Margaret Burroughs' words would ring true over time. By 1943, artists would have to defend their love, livelihood, and rights to a building that had become a haven for their creativity.
Some of them never survived. Dr. Burroughs, she had a slush fund. She buried the artists, or fed the artists, took care of them.
It was a very difficult time, both the war and the loss of funding from the government.
William Carter decided he was going to be a painter, but he'd sell it for little or nothing just to survive with. And I'm sure that was true with some of the others, selling great masterpieces for nothing.
Pauline Kai Reed organized a committee of 100 black women to both accumulate funds and be the organizational support to keep this place in existence. 3
women, Wilhelmina Banks, Fern Gayden, and Grace Leeming. And they often took money out of their own pockets to pay the utility bills and whatever else.
I could see Fern now scrubbing the first floor of our gallery. I can see her now.
As fundraising became more important, the center relied heavily on the artists' and models' balls. These extravaganzas began in 1939 and would reach their peak in the 1940s.
I was a chairman for 2 years and participated as a dancer.
That was our largest moneymaker of that period, and the artists would dress their models up and try to outdo each other.
It had all the elements of a stage production, lighting, costume design, choreography, singing, and of course the accompanying orchestral music.
The models would walk around in their costumes and prizes were awarded. Now, people came to Chicago from all over the country for this Artists and Models Ball. And that's, of course, during the day the railroad was flourishing. So people came by train to Chicago specifically to attend this affair.
People were bringing turkeys and chickens and sitting there playing cards. People with little money and the wealthy people had to come together because they couldn't go downtown. It was a colorful event, and the costumes were just fantastic.
The skits and costumes represented different countries. In one year, one of the male dancers painted his body, and so you could see almost anything.
And somewhere in the 50s, early 50s, it stopped. If you ask the artist to leave, you don't have any artists that are going to create these fabulous costumes for your ball.
Factions between the board and artists would come to the surface as the government introduced a new color, red.
Anybody who spoke out or spoke up for anything, spoke out against discrimination and segregation, was targeted: black, white, red, brown, and yellow.
The Red Scare took away really a lot of artists.
We talked about what was happening in the world and who was right and who was wrong, and we talked about black things, and a lot of white people came around too, but they were people who were who had an agenda.
I was questioned about my association, say, with Paul Robeson. I admired him greatly. One particular year, when I sent in my membership to the then chairman of the board, it was returned to me because this was at the height of the McCarthy period.
It seems like everybody was a progressive in the 1930s, and everybody had some kind of association with the U.S. Communist Party. And in the 1950s, that was used against a lot of people very, very unfairly and tragically.
Charles White was branded with communist connections. My estimation of Charles White's work is what that man does as master draftsman is way beyond anything in terms of communist dialectics.
Still, for some artists, having once been employed by the WPA helped them to get jobs.
Black artists who had never done anything with art before had been called to teach art in the neighborhoods, and they were paid, and this was the first time this had ever happened.
So many artists went to the South, where they had family.
In 1952, I was studied in Mexico City with the Taller de Gráfica Popular.
It was where Diego Rivera, the great muralist, and Siqueiros were painting in Orozco. It was a kind of mecca. One had to go to Mexico to complete one's education. New York was also an enormous draw because it was really the center of the art world.
As politics and economics took a toll, the civil rights movement would shift the landscape and the canvas. Negro artists would be called by a color, black. The people who made up the Southside Community Arts Center, artists and elite, would change as well. I like the concentration, the crush. I like working with language, as others like working with paints and clay or notes. As the 60s and 70s dispersed the center's original artists, the Southside Community Arts Center would become a place of legends.
Our legend is that that was Gwendolyn Brooks' favorite window well for writing poetry.
Gwendolyn Brooks would become the first Black American to win a Pulitzer Prize and later become the State of Illinois Poet Laureate. Gordon Parks's work would be found in the inaugural issues of Ebony magazine, Celebrity Photography, and Life magazine. As a filmmaker, he would bring one of the 70s largest box office movies to the silver screen.
My brother was publicist for the Art Center. He went into the war, and after the war decided to pursue a career as an actor, and did in fact do that for the rest of his life.